is our first experience with Rohmer for both James and I. So you're familiar with his whole filmography, more or less, it seems like. So can you give us and our audience just a general introduction to Rohmer?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. Rohmer was part of the so-called French New Wave, a group that started out writing criticism of French film around Cahiers du Cinéma, French journal, and then went into filmmaking. And he was an older member of that group and started as a filmmaker a bit later than some of the others did, at least in terms of his work that made it to the public. And he's certainly the most religiously minded member of that group, and I think really the one whose work proved to be the most enduring, in that he continued over the course of decades into the 2000s, I believe, with The Romance of Estrée and Celadon, his last film, or nearly last film. Maybe Triple Agent is the last. But he continued into the 2000s, and so over the course of many decades was making quality films, and he just showed a lot more, had a much longer shelf life, I think, than some of his peers who were maybe more initially celebrated. And I think that was connected with some of his abiding concerns, which I think are close to the heart of this podcast, concerns having to do with faith, not just in the sense of religious commitment, but in terms of fidelity to a woman or an idea. He was very interested in those things, and so though his films only occasionally treat religious themes explicitly, they are suffused with concerns that I think are felt by anyone who tries to live by a certain rule, or someone who maybe holds certain beliefs that aren't accepted by all of one's peers. Those themes reappear throughout his films, and we certainly see them in My Night at Mott's. I often like to watch genre films that have certain kind of set conventions, and part of the pleasure is seeing the variations between various genre films, be it a film noir or a gangster film or a western. And one thing that Rohmer did throughout his career was create series of films. So you have the 6 Moral Tales, and then later in his career you have the 4 Seasons, and you can kind of connect other films of his. There are certain kind of recurring themes or structures. And what you see in each one of the 6 Moral Tales is this basic structure. A man has an initial commitment to some woman, and then he is drawn toward another woman, and then at the end he returns to the first woman. And so this commitment can be very unserious. In what's really just a film short, The Bakery Girl of Monceau, there's a man wandering down the street, and he sees a woman frequently, and he means to talk to her, but then all of a sudden he stops seeing her. One day he no longer sees her. On the very day he resolves to speak to her. And so then, as he's looking for her, he's distracted by a second woman, and then in the end he returns to the first. And then we see something almost like this in My Night at Mott's. Our hero, an engineer at the Michelin plant in Clermont-Ferrand, France, a provincial city, which in this film we see blanketed in snow, contrasting beautifully with the black stone of the city's cathedral, built from the igneous rock from the local volcano.
Wow.
So we see these strong contrasts. He spies a woman at Mass, and then he spends the titular night at the home of Maud, a second woman, and then he ends up returning to the first woman. So this structure, initial commitment, a certain deviation, and then a return to the initial commitment, that reaches its culmination in the last of the Moral Tales, or at least its most explicit form in the last of the Moral Tales, where you have a married man who very nearly commits adultery, and then at the end of the film returns to his wife. And so in the Moral Tales, this commitment can be very, very unserious. You just see a girl on the street, or maybe you see a girl at Mass, And that's just an idea in his head. He has no relationship with the woman. He's almost stalking her. There's not really any.
Right.
He's not bound to her in any way, but so the man is not being a good Catholic by remaining faithful to that initial idea of the woman. I mean, he may be a good Catholic by not, say, sleeping with another one, fornication being a sin. But what the particular type of fidelity he's showing is to an idea of a woman, and there is a real integrity in that, and it is an indication of his moral seriousness.